My name is Zoe Adjonyoh. I have a restaurant called Zoe's Ghana Kitchen in Brixton, and we also have a street food business and event catering company, and I have a cookbook out at the moment called Zoe's Ghana Kitchen. And food, basically, I cook. I cook contemporary Ghanaian food. I first got into cooking, I guess, as a kid. My mum's Irish and my dad's Ghanaian. So, but what used to happen is my dad used to bring home ingredients like kenkey and shito and smoked fishes and things like this. Ingredients that weren't common to anything we knew in the kitchen or in the environment. I used to watch him eating and cooking it because he used to cook for himself very selfishly, and it just piqued my interest about what that food was and where it was from. And I guess it was kind of a way of spending a bit of time with him and getting to know him through cooking with him. So that's sort of the first inroad to Ghanaian food for me, was watching my dad eat and cook and bugging him to teach me. He didn't teach me very much in the end. Basic things like chale sauce, which I'm going to be cooking for you in a bit later. It was more to do with, I mean, he wasn't an amazing cook, but it was just obviously that this food was very important to him because it was a reminder of home. So then it became important to me, and it became in a way of sort of having access to that side of my heritage, because we didn't have any Ghanaian family in London. So I didn't have access to that in the same way as I did to my Irish side. So the food became important for that reason. And he used to cook things like kenkey and which is like fermented maize dough dumpling, and fish, kenkey and fish, and shito was really important. It's like a traditional hot pepper sauce made with like ground smoked fish, super hot and delicious, a bit like sambal. And it's just, it was more to do with getting me acquainted with flavours than teaching me so much. But the thing that I called chale sauce was like the first thing he officially taught me to cook. But his lesson was, he put it all in the pan, and then when it splashed up at the back of the cooker, then it's done. So that was the lesson, really. And the rest was just me observing, and then over the years tweaking, and then recipe hunting and etc. What I love about Ghanaian food is it's so rich and varied and textured in its flavours. It's got so many flavour profiles. It's super comforting, can be super wholesome. And my experience of it has been a real connection to my roots and my family and my heritage, and informed who I am, So that's why it's super important to me. And I think that, food from Africa generally has not been exposed enough to people in the UK. So it's important to me, the message of bringing African food to the masses is about just getting people to not be intimidated by some of the ingredients, and just trying to help people understand all the various different ways they can use them, because it's exciting food, it's exciting flavours, and I feel like everyone should be cooking it, really. Something I've been saying for a number of years now is that African food has been on the sidelines, because we have such a foodie culture here, especially in the UK, especially in London. There's lots of reasons, I think, for that. I think part of it is the fact that people from the communities, like people in the diaspora who've left their home countries from Africa, they cook for their community wherever they are in the UK. And I don't think up until recently people thought of anyone else being interested to taste it or experience it. So there's a bit of that kind of closeted community around food, but also I think there's this intimidation and hesitancy from people who have like sort of a generic profile about what African food is and don't really understand all the nuances and the differences. And why is now the right time? Well, because the media profile has been raised, because more and more people are cooking it now. You've got lots more supper clubs, loads more street food, lots more pop-ups, even more restaurants actually. And it's just a case of, I used to talk about an African food revolution, but now it's more of a movement, really. It's more of a groups of people living in the UK who want to champion what's amazing and delicious from their home countries, and they're doing that in bigger and bigger numbers. And I think part of that has been to, you know, without blowing my own trumpet, people like myself or the guys like the Groundnut who have given a bit of profile to food and given access to people outside of the communities where the food comes from, so that it piques people's interest in it. So why now is because really Africa is the last continent to be explored food-wise, and there's enough of us doing it now to sort of have a momentum behind it. Yeah, the time is now, for sure. So back in 2010, I moved into this flat after coming back from travelling around the States for a few months, and had a lovely time, came back absolutely broke. And this flat at the time was basically a bare shell. There was nothing in it. There was no rooms. We had a bathroom. That was it. Not even a kitchen. So we had no furniture. Zip. And the week after we moved in here was something called Hackney Wicked, which is basically a celebration of the art community in Hackney Wicked. Lots of open studios. And my girlfriend at the time, Jasmine, was a video artist, so she wanted to use this as an open studio. So this was a gallery space, effectively. And I didn't have very much to do because I couldn't be in here because it was a studio, and there was lots of people flooding into Hackney Wick. Basically, they wouldn't normally be here because at the time it was an industrial estate, nowhere near gentrified as, you know, it is now. And I just basically saw it as an opportunity to make a bit of pocket money because I was skint. So I cooked a dish that all my friends used to bug me to cook over and over again, which is the groundnut soup, peanut butter stew. There's a sign up there, actually, the very first sign. And I made one big pot of this on a baby belling stove. So there's 2 top stove outside my front door. My friend Ruth made that sign saying Zoe's peanut butter stew. And it has this amazing piquancy, this kind of sweet and spicy smell to it. And this huge vat of the stuff was because the wind was blowing the smell. And so loads of people came and kept selling out of this stew. And it was this lovely kind of social environment outside the flat where people were coming, eating, drinking, asking about the food, asking about where it's from. And it was very pleasant, you know, for 3 days doing that. And it was a lot of fun. And people were like, oh, you should do this again, and you should do this again. And I was like, maybe, probably not, but maybe. But that was that weekend. And then the following year, the same weekend, it's an annual festival. We had a bit more furniture, we had a bit more of a kitchen, and we decided to turn this into a restaurant space for that same weekend rather than a gallery. And we called it Zoe's Ghana Kitchen, and I made a flyer that said, "You've never tasted anything so tasty," and then put 5 stars on it, African Food Review. And we sort of built and made loads of tables and chairs in here. I went to Ridley Road, got loads of fabric, started making a playlist of Afrobeat and high life, and really transformed the flat incredibly, actually. And people thought it was a restaurant, and we were just sold out solidly for 3 or 4 days. And everyone was like trying to book for the next Wednesday or the next Thursday or in 2 weeks' time. And I was like, no, you're in my living room right now. This isn't a thing. But basically it was so popular that I started collecting email addresses and said, look, if I do it again, I'll let you know. And then I did do it again. And then people kept telling other people, and it kind of built its own momentum. And before I knew it, I had this huge following, I guess, of people coming to my restaurant in my living room for dinner. And it was great. It was fun. And then blogs picked up on it and some press picked up on it. And then I started getting asked to do catering. Did some street food, and it became what it is today, you know? It was extraordinary to me how popular and busy it was constantly. It was constantly sold out, and I thought, well, I didn't think I was the most amazing cook in the world, so I had to have a think about what was it that was so inspiring people to want to take part in it, to eat this food and in this type of environment and all those things. So I guess what I'm saying is, once I realised it was a business, I had to kind of think about why people liked it, and I realised that it was because I didn't have access to this food anywhere else. And the tone and the environment I set was to make it as accessible as possible, so that it was a friendly space. It was like you are dining in my living room, and it's kind of the same vibe I've followed through for every supper club or event ever since, or even Brixton restaurant. It feels cosy, it doesn't feel intimidating. Everything's explained really clearly, and so yeah, once I realised it was it was going to be a business, I had to kind of think, what do I want to do with that, and what do I want to say about this food, and what did it mean to me? And that came a bit later, which was kind of while I was doing my MA at Goldsmiths, and I was writing a memoir as part of my dissertation about my dad and my relationship with him and Ghana and stuff. And then that kind of took me back to Ghana for those dual purposes, was to research for my book, which still hasn't been written, and sort of go on a recipe hunt mission to find more recipes for my flourishing business, and get to know my family, So yeah, so the food's taken me on this amazing journey from something that was like a pot outside my house to this sort of full circle investigation of heritage and food and sharing food and what it means to eat together, I guess. By the time I started writing the book, which is actually quite a long time ago now, about, God, where are we, 2017? It's taken a long time to come out, actually. I'd had 4 or 5 years under my belt of cooking, like a lot, festivals, street food, catering, the restaurants, pop-ups, residencies. So I felt a competency about, because I'd been asked before to do a cookbook and I didn't feel ready to do that. So I felt a competency about my food and my understanding and my interpretation and what it meant to me. And obviously the trip to Ghana played a huge part in that, because, there's that question. I had a question mark over myself for a while about whether I was entitled to be sort of reimagining this food or trying to bring it to a new audience, and whether my tweaks and interpretations did something to that authenticity, which is a word I really don't like being used around food, to be honest, because I find it really clumsy and doesn't do justice to the fact of what it means, because authenticity comes from the person and the experience of the food. That's what's authentic about my food, and I'm very open about my journey with that food and what I'm trying to do. It's more of a celebration of Ghanaian flavours and ingredients than it is a strict didact or template for this is how you cook Ghanaian food. It's not really about that. It's about, here are some wonderful flavours and ingredients, and here's what I do with them. Here's some suggestions for what you could do with them. So it's more about that more general accessibility to flavour. So the trip to Ghana was super important for lots of reasons, but I think the three main ones were this. What I learned was, first of all, just how much fresh food was used. So much fresh fish, so much green food, taro leaves, spinach, all the fresh tomatoes and ginger and thyme and garlic, lots of fresh herbs and spices I didn't know would be available there. So that gave me sort of reassurance about the fact I was using those in my cooking in London. I was like, oh, okay, so it's okay to use thyme in this, or it's okay to use nutmeg or cinnamon. Oh yeah, and they have this fish, so that's cool. I wasn't, for want of a better word, bastardizing anything. And the second thing was, in my grandmother's house, 3 different women live in that house. So my grandmother, who's Fanti, my aunt Evelyn, who's Ewe, so up in the Volta originally, and a woman called Mercy, who looks after my grandmother, and she's Ashanti. And I was cooking with all of them, and I could cook the same dish effectively with 3 different women, and they'd each cook it a different way. So again, that gave me some sort of insight and relief about, oh, okay, so it can vary household to household, because it's varying tribe to tribe. And in the same way, like people try to get you to say what defines Ghanaian food or stuff like that. It's really difficult, actually, because every house has their own, everyone's mother has their own jollof recipe, you can't compete with that. And every household cooks slightly differently. And so it's okay to have your own version of that, because everyone does. the third big thing, I think, was this problem that people assume that all Ghanaian or West African or African food must be really spicy and hot. And it isn't. It's like, it's much more rich and textured and evolved than that. It's got so many depths to it. And one of the funny things that happened to me was my Aunt Evelyn was making shito, that hot pepper sauce, which you can get in jars, mild, extra hot or whatever. But she was making shito and she was taking this amazing pride in showing me how to make it, and she, and I loved that. It was brilliant. But I was also making my own shito at home before going there. She didn't know that because I kept it on the DL. I didn't want any weird pressure about being like cooking Ghanaian food for my Ghanaian family. So I kept very quiet about that first. So she was showing me how to make it, and adding her ingredients, and I was like, yep, tick, I'm doing that, tick, I'm doing that. And then when she put in her chili into the pot, I was like, oh, is that all you're putting in? And she was like, eh. She's like, don't interrupt. Anyway, and so I tasted it, and it was delicious, but it was super mild. But she thought it was really hot, and so she was expecting it to blow my head off, so I had to then pretend that I found it really hot. So I was like doing a performance of, oh yeah, you know, hot. But it wasn't, it was super mild compared to the one I make at home. So that was interesting. It was like, oh, do you know what I mean? Like, it's not all about how hot the food is, because rightly so, you sort of, chilies and those kind of hot spices should be used as a seasoning when you're cooking, in the same way that salt and pepper is. It's like you do it to your taste, you know. It's like if you don't like things super hot, it doesn't have to be super hot. So all of those things combined, and just looking at, because I travelled a bit across the country and seeing how different regions had different types of ingredients and what they did with them, all of that poured into sort of my knowledge bank that I brought back, and definitely informed a lot of what's in the cookbook for sure. What's happening next? Well, currently, right now we're doing a residency at Sun and 13 Cantons, so we've got a lovely little spot in central London in Soho, and that's really exciting to be there and to be amongst that foodie scene, bringing our stuff there. Who knows is the answer. I'd like to open another restaurant in by the end of the year really, but soon. So that's definitely on the cards, but other than that, I think more writing, maybe another cookbook, maybe some travel writing, maybe cooking on TV, whatever keeps telling people to eat African, basically. Food from Africa is what I'm about, so whatever takes me there. So today I'm going to be cooking a groundnut soup. I love it, and it's a dish that launched Zoe's Ghana Kitchen. It's now a signature dish on my menu. So basically what you have to do first is a chale sauce. So that is onion, tomatoes, ginger, garlic, a bit of puree, some salt and some chilli. Now I need to dice this onion so we can saute it in the pan. I'm going to put in half a teaspoon of chilli, half a teaspoon of curry, we have a nice pre-made vegetable stock. So I'm going to add peanut butter. This is a 450 gram jar. I'm going to add pretty much half of it. So you just keep stirring it through. So the peanut butter thickens it up, adds that beautiful sweetness, changes the colour. Alright, so we're going to make the groundnut soup. It's a thick one. I'm going to add some more groundnut garnish. Ooh. Obviously we have to have a couple of chopped chilies. It's fine. So now we're going to make yam chips. So this is a pune yam. So it's basically a root vegetable, very hardy root vegetable. It's just slightly sweeter. So chips, nice chunky chips. And you've got to make sure you wash them quite well because they're really starchy. Right, so they're going to parboil. Just going to drain it. Watch that steam. If you want it to be fancy pants, you could stick some garlic in with this and some thyme. But we're not being fancy pants today. Some smoked paprika. Here goes another bit of sea salt. I have to pick one that looks super delicious. This one. Okay, dip it in. It's going to be quite hot, I think. As it should be. Crispy on the outside, fluffy in the middle. Next up, we're making kelewele, very famous type of street food, which is plantain, usually cooked on a griddle or barbecue by street food vendors. So you take the top off and the tail off, down the middle, and nice bite-sized pieces. Pop it in a bowl. Spice mix is already pre-made. It's going to add a little touch of groundnut to that. Right, good old groundnut oil again. Shouldn't take more than about 5 minutes, I don't think, in a hot pan. Alright, so we're just going to put them in a bowl and dress them with some groundnuts. And that's kelewele. This is a really good snack, or a really good side. I'm going to dress it with a bit of groundnut. Okay, so kelewele, let's taste it. It is actually really, really delicious. Oh, one more. Oh my god. Okay, so right now we're going to do very quickly an avocado and groundnut salad. So we have a bowl to mix, some groundnuts we chopped earlier, avocado, very small red onions, some fresh lemon, but we can use lemon juice if you want, a bit of sea salt, cinnamon, black pepper and cayenne pepper, and if you want to go there, you can, and I will, with a bird's eye chili, a little bit. So I like to keep the squares. I don't like it to be too mushy. So 1 baby onion, half teaspoon of cayenne, black pepper, cinnamon. Might add a tiny bit extra salt. I feel like it's a bit tight on the old salt there. Tiny, tiny, tiny bit of olive oil. And then half of the groundnuts to go in the mix. And you just mix. Might have overdone it a little bit with the lemon juice, but very tasty.